I'm 65 years old and my name is Harriet. Just last month, I lost my husband Franklin after 40 wonderful years of marriage. We built everything together from our luxury real estate business to our beautiful home. But what I never expected was for my daughter Allison to inherit everything and change overnight. She kicked me out of my own home with the cruel words, "Find somewhere else to die." Little did she know what was coming 3 days later. If you're watching this story of betrayal and justice, please let me know where you're from in the comments, and subscribe to hear more stories from those who've walked through fire and emerged stronger. Franklin and I met in college, both of us studying business with big dreams. He was tall, with kind eyes, and a smile that made me feel at home. We fell in love quickly and married right after graduation. Neither of us came from money, but we had determination and complemented each other perfectly. I was detail-oriented and cautious, while Franklin was visionary and charismatic. We started our luxury real estate business from our tiny apartment. Franklin would find undervalued properties in promising neighborhoods, and I would handle the finances and client relationships. It took years of working 16-hour days, but eventually, Franklin Luxury Properties became one of the most respected real estate firms in our area, specializing in multi-million-dollar homes. When I became pregnant with Allison at 27, we were ecstatic. Franklin built a nursery himself in our first real house, painting clouds on the ceiling so she could dream big. We both agreed that despite our growing business, our daughter would always be our greatest achievement. Allison was a beautiful child, bright and curious. Franklin doted on her, calling her his little princess and bringing her to construction sites, wearing a tiny hard hat he had custom made. As she grew, she seemed to inherit my attention to detail and her father's charm. We sent her to the best schools, cheered at her soccer games, and celebrated every milestone. 2 years ago, Franklin began experiencing health problems. It started with shortness of breath during his morning jogs, then progressed to chest pains that would wake him at night. The doctors diagnosed him with a serious heart condition requiring multiple surgeries and eventually limiting his involvement in the business. During this time, Allison was 36, married to Gregory, a finance manager at a technology firm. They had been together for 5 years, after meeting at a charity gala. I never quite warmed to Gregory. There was something calculated about him, the way his smiles never reached his eyes. Franklin would dismiss my concerns, saying I was being overprotective of our daughter. Despite our support, Allison struggled to find her footing career-wise. She had studied art history, but never pursued it professionally. She jumped between marketing jobs, interior design work, and briefly attempted to launch her own clothing line. Franklin and I supported each endeavor financially, never questioning her choices. As Franklin's condition worsened, he began putting his affairs in order. We had long conversations about the future, about the business, our assets, and how to provide for Allison while ensuring she developed independence. "She needs to learn the value of what we built," he would say, looking worried. "I fear we may have made things too easy for her." In his final week, Franklin was hospitalized after a severe cardiac event. The doctors said recovery was unlikely. I barely left his side, sleeping in the hospital chair, holding his hand, as monitors beeped around us. Allison visited daily, often tearful, bringing photo albums and reminiscing about childhood memories with her father. The night before he passed, Franklin had a moment of clarity. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Remember what we agreed upon, Harriet. It's all in place." I nodded, assuming he meant our discussions about the will and business succession. I had no idea what he truly had planned. The morning Franklin died was quiet. I was holding his hand when the monitors flatlined. I felt an emptiness I cannot describe, like half of myself had vanished. The nurse gently led me out while the doctor confirmed what we already knew. In the hallway, I called Allison, who rushed to the hospital. She collapsed in my arms, both of us grieving the man who had been our center. The funeral was beautiful but surreal. Hundreds attended, from business associates to families who lived in homes we had sold them. Allison delivered a moving eulogy about her father's generosity and wisdom. I felt strangely disconnected, as if watching everything from a distance. People kept telling me how strong I was, but I wasn't strong. I was numb. 3 days after the funeral, James Thornton, our family attorney and Franklin's friend for 30 years, called us to his office for the reading of the will. I dressed carefully that morning, putting on the pearl earrings Franklin had given me on our 30th anniversary. Allison and Gregory picked me up, both dressed in somber business attire. "Are you ready for this, Mom?" Allison asked, squeezing my hand as we drove. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." I nodded, appreciative of her support. Franklin and I had discussed the will extensively. The plan was for me to inherit most assets and continue running the business with our trusted management team until I decided to retire. Allison would receive a generous trust fund and eventually inherit everything after my passing. James's office was in a historic building downtown with leather chairs and walls lined with law books. He greeted us with solemn handshakes and offered condolences again before taking his seat behind his mahogany desk. Franklin was very specific about his wishes. James began opening a thick folder. "I'll now read the will in its entirety." What followed was nothing like what Franklin and I had discussed. According to the will, James read, Allison was to inherit our family mansion valued at $7 million and $53 million in cash and investments, representing nearly all our liquid assets. I was to receive only a modest monthly pension of $5,000 and lifetime health insurance. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This made no sense. Franklin and I had built everything together. We were equal partners in the business and in life. How could he leave me with so little? There had to be some mistake. "James, there must be an error," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Franklin and I discussed this extensively. James looked uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses. "I'm sorry, Harriet. These are Franklin's explicit instructions as written and legally notarized 3 months ago." I glanced at Allison, expecting her to be equally confused, perhaps even offer to make things right. Instead, I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. A coldness, a calculation as her eyes darted across the documents, listing her new assets. Gregory was less subtle, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he placed a proprietary hand on Allison's shoulder. "Dad obviously trusted me to take care of everything now," Allison said, her voice carrying a new authority. "I'm sure he had his reasons. But we discussed something completely different," I insisted, turning back to James. "Just weeks ago, he confirmed that I would maintain control of our assets and the business." James avoided my eyes. "I can only execute the will as written, Harriet. I'm bound by legal obligation. The document is clear and properly executed." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. James explained technicalities about asset transfers and tax implications, while I sat frozen, trying to understand how my life had just been upended. Had Franklin changed his mind without telling me? Had I misunderstood our conversations? The drive home was excruciating. Allison sat in the passenger seat while Gregory drove, both of them already discussing renovation plans for their house. "I've always thought that living room wall should come down to open up the space," Allison said, as if I weren't even there. "And the kitchen needs updating." "The kitchen your father renovated for my birthday 5 years ago?" I asked, finding my voice. Allison glanced back at me with an expression that was almost pitying. "Mom, it's outdated. The countertops are last decade's style." I tried once more to make sense of what had happened. "Allison, did your father ever mention changing his will to you? This isn't what we had planned." She sighed. "Mom, grief can sometimes confuse our memories. Dad obviously wanted me to take over. Maybe he didn't want to upset you by telling you directly. Maybe she's developing early dementia, I heard Gregory whisper to her not quite quietly enough. The house I had called home for 20 years suddenly felt foreign as we pulled into the driveway. This was the house where Franklin and I had hosted countless Christmas mornings, anniversary parties, and business dinners. Now, according to a piece of paper, it no longer belonged to me. The first week after the will reading was surreal. Allison and Gregory moved into the master bedroom despite my still living in the house. They explained it was more practical since they were now the owners. I was relocated to the guest bedroom across the hall. I watched in stunned silence as Allison brought in interior designers who walked through rooms I had lovingly decorated, pointing out everything that would need to be updated and modernized. The antique writing desk where Franklin used to work on special projects was labeled outdated. The hand-painted Italian tiles we had installed in the entryway after our 20th anniversary trip to Florence were deemed too busy. Gregory was worse, strutting around like a peacock in his new kingdom. He took to sitting in Franklin's chair in the study, drinking Franklin's prized Scotch collection, and even wearing some of Franklin's watches. "They're just going to sit there otherwise," he said, when he caught me staring at my husband's Rolex on his wrist. One evening, I was returning from a walk in the garden when I overheard Allison and Gregory talking in the kitchen. "We need to discuss what to do about your mother," Gregory said. "What do you mean?" Allison replied. "She can't stay here forever, Allie. This is our house now. How are we supposed to make it our own with her watching our every move, making those sad eyes every time we change something?" There was a pause before Allison answered. "You're right. It's awkward. But what can I do? Just kick out my own mother right after Dad died." "The will doesn't stipulate she gets to live here," Gregory pressed. "She has her pension. She can find an apartment or a retirement community, somewhere more appropriate for her situation." I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to believe what I was hearing from my own daughter. The next morning, Allison asked me to join her for coffee on the terrace. It was a beautiful spring day, the garden in bloom just as Franklin would have loved. The scene was cruelly mismatched with the conversation that followed. "Mom, Gregory and I have been thinking," she began, not quite meeting my eyes. "It might be best if you found your own place." "My own place?" I repeated, my coffee cup suspended midway to my lips. "Yes. This house is really too big for you to manage alone, and Gregory and I need our space as we start this new chapter." Her voice had the practiced quality of someone who had rehearsed this speech. "Allison, this is my home. Your father and I built this life together." Her expression hardened. "According to the will, this is my house now. Legally, you're just a guest. A guest in the home I designed where I raised you." I could feel tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. "Mom, don't make this difficult. You have 30 days to find somewhere else. We'll even help you look for a nice retirement community." Her tone was patronizing, as if she were doing me a favor. When I didn't immediately respond, her facade cracked slightly. "This isn't personal, it's just business. Dad left everything to me because he trusted my judgment. And your judgment is to throw your mother out of her home weeks after becoming a widow?" I asked. Something flashed in Allison's eyes, then a coldness I had never seen before. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. The business doesn't need you, I don't need you, and this house is mine." The cruelty of her words felt like a physical blow. This wasn't my daughter, the little girl who had once made me get well soon cards for even the smallest cold, who had cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. Who was this stranger wearing my daughter's face? I tried calling James that afternoon, hoping there was some legal recourse, but his secretary said he was unavailable and couldn't speak with me yet. I left an urgent message, but received no call back. The next day, Allison presented me with a list of retirement communities and apartment complexes. "We've already called these places. They have openings," she said, sliding the paper across the kitchen counter. "Gregory knows the manager at the Willows. It's a very nice facility." I spent the next 2 weeks in a daze packing up my life. Allison supervised as I went through my belongings, questioning whether certain items were really mine or part of the house. Family photos were scrutinized. Jewelry was inventoried. It was humiliating. On my final day in the home, Gregory helped load my suitcases into a taxi with an efficiency that revealed his eagerness to see me gone. Allison gave me a brief, stiff hug. "We'll check in soon," she said, already turning back toward the house before I could respond. As the taxi pulled away, I watched my daughter standing in the doorway of what had been my home for 2 decades. She didn't wave goodbye. The taxi dropped me at the Parkview Hotel, a modest 3-star establishment where I had booked a room for the next week while I figured out my next steps. The young man at reception looked concerned as he helped with my bags, probably wondering why a woman my age was checking into a hotel alone with no clear checkout date. My room was clean but impersonal, with generic artwork and a view of the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my coat, trying to process how my life had imploded in just a few weeks. From respected businesswoman and loving wife and mother to homeless widow with a suitcase of hastily packed belongings. That first night was the lowest point. I couldn't sleep replaying memories of Allison throughout her life. Her first steps across our living room, Franklin and I cheering her on, teaching her to ride a bike in the park, bandaging her scraped knees when she fell, helping her prepare for school dances, beaming with pride at her graduation. Had I somehow failed as a mother to raise a child who could treat me this way? The next morning, I tried to access our joint bank accounts, only to find they had already been transferred solely to Allison's name. The only funds I could access were in my personal checking account, about $20,000 plus the first payment of my $5,000 monthly pension that had been promised in the will. In a city where a modest apartment rented for at least $3,000 a month, this wouldn't last long. The business we had built together, worth over $100 million, was now entirely out of my reach. The accounts I had managed for decades were no longer mine to access. I called my friend Janet, one of the few close friendships I'd maintained despite my busy life with the business. When I explained what had happened, she was horrified. "Harriet, that's insane. You can stay with me until we figure this out," she insisted. "This doesn't sound like something Franklin would do." That afternoon, I moved my few belongings to Janet's spare bedroom. Her home was warm and welcoming, but I felt like an intruder, a charity case. I had gone from hosting dinner parties in my $7 million home to sleeping in a friend's guest room with borrowed toiletries. Over tea in her kitchen, Janet voiced what I had been afraid to articulate. "Something isn't right about this will, Harriet. Franklin adored you. You built that business together. Why would he leave you with almost nothing?" "I keep asking myself the same question," I admitted. "It goes against everything we had planned, everything we discussed. It's like he became a different person in his final months without telling me." "Or someone influenced him," Janet suggested cautiously. "Gregory has always seemed opportunistic." I shook my head. "Franklin was too smart to be manipulated like that, but I can't understand why he would do this." That night in Janet's guest room, I cried myself to sleep for the first time since I was a young girl. Not just for the material losses, but for the betrayal by both my husband and daughter. The two people I had loved most in the world had either deceived me or abandoned me when I was most vulnerable. I woke the next morning feeling different. The tears had washed away some of the shock, leaving behind a clarity I hadn't felt since before Franklin's death. I needed answers, and I needed to take control of whatever remained of my life. While Janet was at work, I began searching through the few personal items I had brought with me. In my haste to pack, I had grabbed Franklin's old leather planner, the one he kept for personal notes rather than business. Flipping through it, I found a notation from 3 months ago, around when James said the will had been changed. SD box second envelope, SD box, safe deposit box. Franklin and I had maintained some for business documents and others for personal valuables, but there was one at First National Bank that had been Franklin's alone. He had mentioned it contained family heirlooms and personal mementos he planned to give Allison someday. As I stared at the cryptic note, a memory surfaced of Franklin during one of his more lucid moments in the hospital. "Remember the backup plan, Harriet," he had whispered. "Always have a backup plan." I had assumed he was rambling his mind, drifting to business strategies we had employed throughout our careers. Now I wondered if he had been trying to tell me something important. The next morning, I took a taxi to First National Bank downtown. The marble lobby echoed with purposeful footsteps as I approached the customer service desk, straightening my posture despite the weight of uncertainty. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I explained to the young woman at the desk. It was my husband's. He recently passed away. She expressed condolences and asked for identification. After verifying my details, she checked the system. "Yes, Mrs. Montgomery, you're listed as having access to Box 423. I'll need your key and signature." I had brought the key from my emergency key set, uncertain if it would still work. When the attendant led me to the vault and the key turned smoothly in the lock, I felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. Inside the small metal box were several items: a vintage watch that had belonged to Franklin's father, a small jewelry box containing his mother's pearl earrings, and a sealed manila envelope with my name written on it in Franklin's distinctive handwriting. Below my name were the words, "To be opened 1 week after my death." It had been almost 2 weeks since Franklin's passing. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of Franklin's handwriting along with what appeared to be legal documents. "My dearest Harriet," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then events have unfolded as I feared they might. I owe you an explanation and an apology for what you've endured." Franklin's letter explained everything. He had suspected for months that Gregory had been investigating our business finances, looking for ways to gain control of our assets. During a routine medical appointment, Franklin had overheard Gregory on the phone in the hospital hallway, discussing how the old man wouldn't last much longer, and how they needed to make sure the money stays with Allison, not the business. Concerned about Gregory's influence over our daughter, Franklin had devised a test. He created 2 wills. The first, leaving everything to Allison, was designed to reveal her true character, if she were being manipulated by Gregory's greed. The second will, the real one, was in the envelope I now held, along with instructions for James Thornton. "I prayed I was wrong," Franklin wrote. "I hoped Allison would do the right thing and share everything with you regardless of the will's instructions. If she has, then show her this letter and tear up the second will. You can both laugh at my unnecessary suspicions." But if Allison had turned against me as Franklin feared she might under Gregory's influence, then the second will would become active exactly 1 week after the first will was read. This will reversed everything, leaving me with 80% of all assets, including the house and business, while Allison would receive only 20% in a controlled trust that I would manage. The legal documents explained that by accepting the inheritance and then mistreating me, Allison had triggered a clause proving undue influence and moral turpitude, which invalidated the first will automatically. Franklin's final instructions were clear. "Contact James immediately. He has been under strict instructions not to speak with you until the week had passed to ensure the test was valid. He has the legal framework already in place." I sat in the small private room at the bank, tears streaming down my face. But these were different tears. My husband hadn't betrayed me. He had been protecting me, protecting our legacy from someone who sought to exploit our daughter's weaknesses. I called James's office immediately. His secretary put me through right away, almost as if he had been waiting for my call. "Harriet," he said, his voice filled with relief, Thank God. I was going to call you today if I didn't hear from you. I have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Can you be there? I found the letter. I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I know about the real will. I wanted to tell you, James said quietly, but Franklin made me swear to follow his instructions exactly. He said it was the only way to know for sure. I understand now, I said. I'll be there tomorrow. That night back at Janet's house, I experienced a storm of emotions. Relief that Franklin hadn't betrayed me, vindication that my suspicions about Gregory had been justified. But most of all, profound sadness that my daughter's true character had been revealed in such a painful way. I had lost my husband, and now, in a different sense, I had lost my daughter too. James's office looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks earlier, but everything else had changed. I arrived early, dressed in a navy suit that Janet had lent me my husband's letter, secure in my handbag. James greeted me with a warm handshake that lingered, conveying his regret at the charade he had been forced to maintain. Franklin put me in an impossible position, he explained as he led me into his private office. I've never been more professionally uncomfortable than watching you receive the false will. But Franklin was adamant that it was the only way to protect you and the business. I understand why he did it now, I said. But I still can't believe Allison would treat me that way, will or no will. James sighed heavily. Franklin suspected Gregory had been planning this for some time. He believed Gregory would contest any will that didn't favor Allison, claiming you had manipulated Franklin during his illness. By creating this scenario, Franklin eliminated that possibility. James showed me the complete legal documentation. The real will had already been authenticated and was ready to be executed. The house, the business, and most of our assets would revert to me immediately. Allison would receive a trust of approximately $12 million, but it would be managed by me until certain conditions were met, including financial counseling and the dissolution of any business relationships with Gregory. I've asked Allison and Gregory to come in at 9:30, James said. They believe it's to discuss some minor details about the business transfer. As we waited, James explained more of Franklin's concerns. He became suspicious last year when Gregory started asking very specific questions about the business structure and Franklin's estate planning. Then Franklin's medical files were accessed by someone using Allison's patient portal authorization, specifically looking at his prognosis information. At 9:30 precisely, we heard Allison and Gregory arrive in the reception area. James asked me if I wanted to wait in an adjoining room until he had explained the situation, but I shook my head. No, I want to see their faces, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. When they entered, Allison and Gregory were mid-conversation about renovations to my home office. They stopped abruptly when they saw me sitting beside James. Mom, what are you doing here? Allison asked, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to annoyance. We have a private meeting with James. Please, both of you sit down, James said formally. This concerns all of you. Gregory looked between James and me, suspicion dawning on his face. What's this about? We've already completed most of the asset transfers. Those transfers are being reversed as we speak, James said, opening a folder on his desk. I'm afraid there's been a significant development regarding Franklin's will. What are you talking about? Allison demanded. The will was clear. Everything goes to me. James adjusted his glasses. That was the preliminary will designed as a test of character, I'm afraid. The actual will, which became active exactly 1 week after our previous meeting, has very different terms. He proceeded to explain the real will's provisions, his tone matter-of-fact, despite the bombshell he was dropping. As he spoke, I watched my daughter's face drain of color. Gregory's reaction was more volatile, his expression morphing from disbelief to anger. This is ridiculous, Gregory exploded. You can't just change a will after it's been read. We'll fight this." James remained calm. "You're welcome to try, but Franklin's instructions were legally impeccable. Moreover, your actions following the reading of the first will, particularly the treatment of Harriet, triggered specific clauses that further solidify the second will's validity." He turned to Allison, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Did you actually read the full will I gave you?" Allison Page, 12 paragraph 4, specifically stated that the inheritance was contingent upon maintaining Harriet's residence and comfort in the family home. By evicting her, you automatically triggered the contingency clause. Gregory turned on Allison. "You said you read everything. How could you miss something that important?" Allison seemed unable to speak, staring at the documents James had placed before her. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Mom, I didn't know. I thought Dad wanted me to take over everything. Gregory said—" "Gregory said what?" I asked quietly. She couldn't hold my gaze, looking down at her hands. "He said you would try to maintain control, that you wouldn't respect Dad's wishes, that I needed to establish boundaries immediately." Gregory stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. We had a legal document. You can't pull this bait and switch." James smiled thinly. "I assure you, Mr. Parker, everything is perfectly legal. Franklin Montgomery was a very careful man, especially when it came to protecting his wife and his business from opportunists." The meeting continued with James explaining the specifics of the real will. Allison sat in stunned silence, while Gregory alternated between threatening legal action and trying to convince Allison they could fight this. But as James laid out the evidence Franklin had accumulated about Gregory's investigations into the business and medical record access, Gregory's bluster diminished. When James mentioned that Franklin had hired a private investigator who documented Gregory's meetings with a competing real estate development firm, Gregory went quiet entirely. "So, here is what happens now," James concluded. "All assets revert to Harriet's control immediately. Allison, you will receive a trust of $12 million managed by your mother until you complete financial counseling and certain other conditions. And Mr. Parker, your personal items will be removed from the Montgomery residence by this afternoon." As the reality of their situation became clear, I watched my daughter transform before my eyes, from the cold, calculating woman who had evicted me to something more recognizable as the child I had raised. She began to cry, looking at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, please, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. We can fix this, can't we? You and me, like always." I felt a strange calm as I looked at her, seeing clearly for the first time. "We have a lot to discuss, Allison, but not today and not with him present." I nodded toward Gregory, who was already on his phone, presumably calling his lawyer. As they left James's office, Allison turned back one last time. "Mom, where will we go?" "The house. The house is my home," I said firmly. "You'll need to find somewhere else to live." That afternoon I returned to my home accompanied by 2 police officers James had arranged to be present, while Allison and Gregory removed their personal belongings. The officers were discreet, standing by quietly as Gregory frantically packed his clothes and electronics, while Allison moved like a sleepwalker, still processing the reversal of fortune. "Mom, please," she begged, as I stood in what had always been my bedroom, watching her empty the closet she had filled with her things. "I made a terrible mistake. I listened to Gregory instead of my heart." "Yes, you did." I agreed, neither harsh nor forgiving, just stating a fact. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, and I was struck by the irony of her using the same plaintive tone I had used just weeks earlier. "You own a condo downtown that you've been renting out," I reminded her, "and you have access to funds for a hotel until you can move in there." "But Gregory and I—" she began. "That's for you to figure out," I interrupted. But I suggest you think carefully about a man who encouraged you to throw your mother out of her home. Gregory and Allison were gone by evening, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and his cologne, in rooms they had briefly claimed as their own. The house felt both empty and full, simultaneously empty of the family I had once believed in, but full of memories and possibilities I had thought lost to me forever. Over the next few days, I reclaimed my life. James helped me regain access to all accounts and business operations. The management team at Franklin Luxury Properties, most of whom had worked with us for decades, were visibly relieved when I returned to the office. Several admitted that Allison and Gregory had already begun discussing restructuring that would have eliminated many long-term employees. Allison called and texted constantly, her messages evolving from desperate pleas for forgiveness to angry accusations, then back to tearful apologies. Gregory had moved out of their shared apartment, blaming her for missing the clause in the will that had undone their plans. I maintained my distance, focusing instead on healing and rebuilding. I visited Franklin's grave, bringing his favorite yellow roses and spending an hour talking to him as if he were sitting beside me. "You knew her better than I did," I said to his headstone. "You saw what I couldn't see, but I still love her despite everything. She's still our daughter." 3 months after the will reversal, I invited Allison to lunch at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where we had celebrated many family occasions. She arrived early, looking thinner and less polished than usual. The confident woman who had evicted me was gone, replaced by someone more reminiscent of the insecure girl she had sometimes been in her teens. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down across from her. "I think it's time we talked," I replied. Our conversation was difficult, painful, but necessary. Allison revealed that Gregory had been feeding her concerns about my mental stability for months, suggesting that I might squander the family fortune or sell the business to competitors. He had convinced her that taking control quickly was the only way to preserve her inheritance. "I wanted to believe we were protecting Dad's legacy," she said, tears threatening. "But I knew deep down that the way we treated you was wrong. I just couldn't stand up to Gregory. He made everything sound so reasonable, so necessary." I listened without interrupting, neither absolving her nor condemning her. When she finished, I shared my own perspective, the pain of her betrayal and the grief of losing not just Franklin, but the daughter I thought I knew. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," I told her honestly, "but I'm willing to try to rebuild something. It won't be what we had before. That's gone. But we might find something new, something honest." I outlined my conditions. She would need to complete therapy, both individually and with me in family sessions. She would need to demonstrate financial responsibility before gaining any control of her trust. And Gregory could never be part of our family relationship again, whatever she decided about her marriage to him. Allison agreed to everything, seemingly grateful for the chance at redemption, however difficult the path might be. The healing process was slow and often painful. Our first therapy session together resulted in tears and recriminations on both sides. But gradually, session by session, we began to build a more honest relationship than we had ever had before. In taking over the business completely, I discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Without Franklin's shadow, I made decisions more confidently, implemented changes I had long considered, and found satisfaction in running the company he and I had built together. 6 months after Franklin's death, I established a foundation in his name focused on supporting families dealing with terminal illness. The irony wasn't lost on me that our family had fractured under that very pressure, but perhaps our experience could help others avoid similar pain. Allison eventually filed for divorce from Gregory, who had moved to another state after a brief and unsuccessful attempt to contest the will. She began working with a career counselor and eventually found a position at an art gallery, rediscovering her passion for art history. Our relationship remained fragile, but healing built on a new foundation of painful truth rather than comfortable illusions. As for me, I found an unexpected freedom in standing completely on my own for the first time in my life. I renovated the house not to erase memories, but to create a space that reflected who I was now. I traveled to places Franklin and I had always planned to visit someday. I made new friends and reconnected with old ones. The pain never disappeared entirely. I still missed Franklin every day. I still grieved for the daughter I thought I had raised and the family we had been. But I discovered that it's possible to carry grief and joy simultaneously, to build a new life around the hollow spaces left by those we've lost, whether through death or betrayal. In the end, Franklin's painful test had revealed difficult truths, but also freed us from living lies. My daughter was not the person I had believed her to be, but perhaps she could become someone better, someone more authentic. And I was stronger than I had ever imagined possible. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it takes away everything we thought defined us. But in that empty space, we can discover who we truly are beyond the roles of wife, mother, or businesswoman. I found myself in that emptiness, and somehow that was enough. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? How did you find the strength to start over? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in facing life's unexpected turns. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our most painful moments.